is the secret of the digital nomad? In other words, how is it these people are able to globetrot the world, dine at sidewalk cafes in Paris, climb Mount Fuji, and roam the streets of Rome, all for less than what it costs to live in a rundown apartment in the U.S.? Hey, I'm author Michael Ramsey, and this is Michael Ramsey Travels. I sold my house, my car, and all my furniture. Then I gave away the rest of my worldly possessions in order to become a digital nomad. Now I travel the world. I live the dream. So the adventure begins today. CarMax this morning, and I'm at the DFW airport getting ready to board my flight that will eventually end in Frankfurt. I'm very excited. Only a few short months ago, I was sitting at my desk in front of my computer in Houston, Texas, looking for a more affordable place to live and eventually retire. At the time, I hadn't yet stumbled onto the secret of the digital nomad. Despite what you may have heard, Texas, especially the part I lived in, is not the most affordable state in which to live. And it's even more expensive to retire in Texas. But why? Texas is one of 9 states that does not impose a state income tax. At first glance, that seems like a very good thing. And maybe it was at one time. But what revenue Texas doesn't get in a state income tax, it makes up for, and then some, in the form of property taxes. The problem with property taxes, which all 50 states now have, is you never stop paying them. Unlike a state income tax, whereas when you stop working, you stop paying, property taxes never end. Not until you move or until you die. Just landed in Frankfurt, the beginning of my new adventure. The only problem is I don't speak a word of German. However, I did watch Hogan's Heroes growing up. But are property taxes really all that bad in Texas? If you were to ask Google which states have the lowest property taxes, Texas, surprisingly, would make the list. However, it would rank moderate to low when compared to other states. But is that true? The state itself does not tax property. Instead, counties impose a tax on property owners, and they set their own rates. And it's not just one rate across the entire county, not in Montgomery County where I lived. They have a different rate for each zip code. In my zip code, I paid 1.7% of the value of my home each year to the county. Already, it's becoming apparent. Taxes in Texas, and I'm sure other states as well, are anything but simple. And it's not just a county tax. We're just getting started. I think that's what Google is missing. Within the county, residents of subdivisions pay what's called the MUD tax, the Municipal Utilities District Tax. When a developer begins a new community, the county builds out the roads, lays down the utilities, water, sewer, gas, and electricity, and puts up the street lamps. In some cities, like Dallas, MUD costs are incorporated into the cost of a new home. It can easily add $30, $40, or even $50,000 to the price. But in the Houston area, the county fronts the costs. Most of the time they sell bonds to pay for it. Then homeowners pay it back in the form of MUD taxes, usually over the course of 30 years. But even after the MUD is paid off, it never really goes away. There will always be maintenance costs. If you get stuck paying the MUD tax, which is appropriately named, it can be expensive. In my subdivision, it was 1.1%. In addition to MUD and county, school districts receive the majority of their funding via property taxes in Texas. Every homeowner in Texas pays school taxes, even if you're old and your kids are grown, even if you've never had kids, even if you don't even like kids, you still pay school taxes. And school taxes can also be very expensive. My school tax in the Conroe ISD, where I lived, were 1.2%. And mine were relatively low in comparison to other districts where they've built these large state-of-the-art educational facilities, complete with a convention center, conference rooms, and a football stadium that rivals most colleges. In these districts, school taxes are twice or more what I was paying. Already, as you can see, it's starting to add up. Low to moderate, nothing. And we're not even done. In addition to all this, every year there's an ever-growing, never-ending list of fees and miscellaneous taxes that somehow find their way into your tax statement. I never even knew what most of these things were for. The final product can easily be several times the low to moderate rate, which wasn't great to begin with. For the Houston area, unless you're inside the city, which is another can of worms, my property taxes were about average. But in some areas, like the Woodlands, which is a master plan community, or the Bridgelands, where they have one of these educational facilities, their property taxes are 5%. Just arrived in Triberg, Germany. This place is spectacular. It's in the Black Forest, just in the corner of Germany, close to Switzerland and France. But the tax rate itself, as bad as it is, isn't even the real gotcha. Every year they reappraise your property, and every year for me, they increase the value of your property. Now you might be thinking, like I used to think, if the value of my property goes up, why is that such a bad thing? The answer is, the more your property goes up in value, the more you're taxed. By state law, an appraisal district cannot increase the value of your property by more than 10% a year. And once again, you might be thinking to yourself, having some sort of a cap is a good thing. In other words, putting the brakes on how much the appraisal district can increase your taxes every year is a good thing, isn't it? Let's say you were to buy a $300,000 home in the Woodlands, although you're probably not going to find anything that cheap in the Woodlands, and you're being taxed at 5%. This means for every $100,000 in value, you pay $5,000. On your $300,000 home, you're taxed $15,000 a year. That's $1,250 a month. In 7.2 years, If they raise the value of your home the full 10% each year, your taxes will double to $30,000 or $2,500 a month. In less than 15 years, it doubles again. You'll be paying $60,000 a year or $5,000 a month. In less than 22 years, $60,000 becomes $120,000 a year or $10,000 a month. Before your house is even paid off, you'll be paying almost as much in taxes each year as you did for the house itself 30 years ago. This, of course, is a worst-case scenario, but conceptually and legally, it's not an impossibility. And even if your taxes don't go up the full 10% each year, are you still okay paying $1 or $2 or $3 or $500 a month more, which is what happened to me? The other problem is, even if your property goes up in value as much as the county thinks it does, you're never going to realize the gain unless you sell. And when you sell, you have to pay real estate fees, which are 6%. And then you have to move. And moving isn't free either, especially in the US where everyone takes all their furniture with them every time. And chances are the new digs aren't going to be any less, not unless you opt for a major downgrade. How can anyone get ahead? And is it any wonder as to why so many people in the US are house poor and are being eaten up in credit card debt? But maybe the problem isn't so much the banks and the credit card companies as it is the state. And what in the world are they doing with all this money? But I digress. Having come to the realization that taxes in Houston are exorbitant, I expanded my search to places I thought would be more affordable. I looked at towns in Central and West Texas, and then I looked into other states like Tennessee, Louisiana, and Alabama. True, the cost of living is lower, especially in West Texas and in Louisiana, and there's less traffic than there is in Houston, but it wasn't that much less. Nevertheless, I tried to convince myself the hot, dry, windy plains of West Texas wouldn't be all that bad. But it's just not somewhere I've always dreamed of living. And in Louisiana, people like to hunt, fish, go noodling, and watch college football. Great fun for someone else, but I'm not into any of these things, especially noodling. That's when I stumbled onto a Traveling with Kristen video on YouTube. I'm not necessarily endorsing her channel. I'm just telling you my story, and this is part of it. In this video, Kristen was interviewing a group of people who called themselves digital nomads. Up until then, I had never heard the term digital nomad. I didn't know what that was. But only 3 months later, 3 months to the day, which I realized later, I was on a flight to Germany. Digital nomads travel the world and work remotely. Many of them live on a couple $1,000s a month or less. My spirit moved when I saw this video. Instantly, I knew this was for me. This was what I had been looking for. For me, traveling, hiking, exploring new places, trying new foods, and experiencing other cultures, not watching college football or noodling, is what I love to do. But how do they do it? How do digital nomads live in the mountains, like where I'm at now, or on picturesque beaches where the water is deep blue, like the picture I used to have in my office. How do they do it all, in some cases, for less than what I was being taxed on my house? Here's how. Without going into the numbers, I think it's safe to say federal income taxes are, in most European countries, especially in Western Europe, slightly higher than the US, but probably not as high as you think. So, if income taxes aren't significantly less in Europe, how is it possible to live for a fraction of what it costs to live in the US? The secret is there's one tax that is much lower in Europe and other countries around the world, especially compared to Houston, Texas, and that is property taxes. Not having extremely high property taxes means that housing is not extremely high either. Not only is it much cheaper to own, it's also much cheaper to rent. The people you're renting from aren't paying these exorbitant property taxes either. They don't have to pass their taxation costs on to you. This is why I did what I did. When I figured out the secret of the digital nomad, I became one as fast as I could. When you're a digital nomad, you get the best of both worlds. Even though I pay income taxes to the US, I don't pay property taxes to Texas. That's a huge savings. It affords me the opportunity to live in beautiful places around the world for less than a cheap apartment in the US. More on that next time. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. In addition to very nice and cheap, and I mean dirt cheap, accommodations here in Europe, I'm finding that housing isn't the only thing that's less expensive. More on that in future videos. I think you're going to be shocked to learn what you're paying for some things compared to everyone else in the world. Again, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Then check out my other YouTube channel, Michael Ramsey Books, and visit my website at michaelramseybooks.com.